For 5 years, a killer was basically hiding in plain sight, haunting this small town in Indiana, and really the entire internet. I mean, think about it. They had his picture, they even had his voice, but they just didn't have a name. So we're going to get into the story of the Delphi murders, a case that wasn't cracked by some brand new clue, but by digging up an old one that was buried for years. Just listen to these 3 words. Guys, down the hill. So incredibly chilling. And they were captured on one of the victims' cell phones. For the longest time, this was it. This was the only real lead they had. That grainy video and that muffled voice, well, that's what gave the killer his infamous name, the Bridge Guy. It's like he was a ghost. He just walked onto that bridge in broad daylight and then, poof, vanished. He left a whole town completely terrified and investigators with a puzzle that just seemed impossible to solve. Okay, so let's set the scene. It's February 13th, 2017. You got 2 best friends, Abby Williams, who was 13, and Libby German, who was 14. They get dropped off for a hike on this trail in Delphi, Indiana, called the Monon High Bridge Trail. And Libby, she's on her phone, she snaps a photo of Abby on the bridge. But then, just minutes later, she starts recording a short video of a man walking toward them. And that was the last time anyone ever heard from them. So let's just walk through the timeline here, because this is where it gets crazy. February 2017. The murders happen, and Libby's phone gives them that crucial video of the suspect. But then, look at this gap. For 5 whole years, nothing. The case goes completely cold. It isn't until all the way in October 2022 that they finally arrest someone, a local guy named Richard Allen. And from there, you have the trial and conviction finally closing a chapter that was just painfully open for so long. I mean, can you even imagine the frustration here? The investigators literally have the killer's picture and his voice, and it's being shared all over the world. They put out sketches, they hold these super emotional press conferences, they're chasing down thousands and thousands of leads, and still, nothing. The trail just went dead. The man on the bridge, it's like he just evaporated, leaving the entire community just stuck in this state of fear and total uncertainty. So what was the big break? How did they finally crack this thing? Well, it wasn't some dramatic deathbed confession, or a brand new piece of DNA. Nope. The answer was already sitting right there in the police files the whole time. It was hidden under just one little word, scribbled in red ink. And to really get why this could even happen, you got to understand the mountain of information they were buried under. We're talking about nearly 20,000 tips pouring in. I mean, it's the classic information overload problem, right? It was like trying to find one specific needle in a giant digital haystack. Just impossible. Okay, this is where the story just gets unbelievable. So get this. Back in 2017, just a few days after the murders, Richard Allen himself calls in a tip. He tells an officer he was on the trails that day and even says his clothes were pretty similar to the guy in the video. But then, someone, and we still don't know who, just writes the word cleared in red ink on that tip sheet, and boom, it gets filed away. Just like that. And honestly, that tip probably would have stayed buried forever if it wasn't for this one woman, Kathy Shank. She's really the unsung hero here. In 2021, she's a retired volunteer, and she's just doing the painstaking work of digitizing all these old paper tips. And she stumbles across Allen's tip, sees that word cleared, and something just doesn't sit right with her. She had the gut instinct to question it, she flagged it, and just like that, a 5-year-old cold case was suddenly red hot. All right, so let's fast forward to the trial. Now that they have Richard Allen as their guy, the prosecution builds their whole case around 2 major things: a single tiny piece of physical evidence and Richard Allen's own words. So the trial basically becomes this clash of 2 completely different stories. On one side, you have the prosecution. They're focused on what they're calling the magic bullet, a ton of confessions, and this one little detail that only the killer could have known. And then on the other side, you've got the defense, and they're just hammering away at the fact that there's absolutely no DNA evidence, and they're arguing that all those confessions, totally unreliable. Okay, let's really break down the prosecution's side of things. First up, the bullet. They found an unspent .40 caliber round right there between the victims' bodies, and forensics matched it directly to Richard Allen's own pistol. Second, the confessions. We're talking more than 60 of them. He confessed in phone calls, in letters, to a psychologist. I mean, they even played a call for the jury where he flat out tells his wife, "I did it. I killed Abby and Libby." And then there's this last thing, the van story. Allen admitted that he was originally going to sexually assault the girls, but he got spooked by a van passing under the bridge and changed his plan to murder. And here's the kicker, the police had never released that detail to the public. But this is the huge question, right? And it's exactly what the defense wanted the jury to be thinking. Okay, so the bullet came from his gun, but how did it get there? And can you really trust the confessions of a guy in that situation? This is the doubt that the defense needed to open the door for their side of the story. So what about the defense? Well, their strategy was pretty straightforward. Create reasonable doubt. And they did that by attacking the confessions and pointing over and over again to that huge hole in the prosecution's case, the complete lack of forensic evidence. So how did they push back? Well, their biggest, most powerful point was the total absence of DNA. I mean, the state's own DNA analyst got on the stand and testified that Richard Allen's DNA wasn't found on a single thing. Not on the girls' clothes, not under their fingernails, nowhere. Next, they went after the confession, saying they weren't reliable. They argued these were just the ramblings of a man having a severe mental breakdown because of his awful prison conditions. And then they tried to float this really wild theory about a ritualistic killing by a pagan cult, but the judge shut that down completely before the jury even got a chance to hear it. So there you have it, the confessions on one side and this glaring lack of DNA on the other. That's what the case came down to for the jury. And after a really long, really emotional trial, the legal part of this whole story was finally about to come to a close. It took them 19 hours, spread out over 3 days, but the jury finally came back with their verdict: guilty. Richard Allen was found guilty on all counts. The man who had just been living his life quietly in Delphi for all those years was now officially convicted of the town's most horrific crime. And the sentence? 130 years. Richard Allen was sentenced to 130 years in prison. That's 65 years for each girl served back to back. The absolute maximum sentence he could have gotten. But a conviction and a prison sentence, that doesn't just magically heal a community. For the town of Delphi, the end of the trial was really the start of a whole new chapter, one that wasn't about the killer anymore, but about honoring the 2 girls whose lives were cut so short. And you know what they did? Instead of just letting this awful tragedy define their town, the community came together in this just incredible way. With donations and tons of volunteer work, they built the Abby and Libya Memorial Park. It's this amazing, huge place with ball fields and playgrounds and trails. It's a living, breathing tribute to the girls, a place built for joy and for healing. This quote from Sheriff Tony Liggett, I think it just says it all, doesn't it? A form of justice was serviced, but it does not bring Abby or Libby back. It really gets to that bittersweet heart of it. Yeah, they got legal justice, the killer's in prison, but that doesn't change the loss. The verdict might close the case file, but it can't fill that hole left in the community and, of course, in their families' hearts. And so that really leaves us with this final question, right? This whole case was solved because one person looked at a file marked cleared and thought, hang on a second. It really makes you think, what is the real difference between just closing a case and actually healing? For the people of Delphi, it seems like the answer wasn't just found in a courtroom. It was found on the playgrounds and the ball fields that they built to make sure Abby and Libby are never, ever forgotten.